Welcome to Shattered Reality with your hosts Kate Valentine and Fahrusha. Prepare to have your paradigms shifted and your truths questioned. And now, Shattered Reality.
Hi, welcome to another episode of Shattered Reality. I am Kate Valentine.
And I am Fahrusha. And today we have our 15th podcast. And we are so pleased to welcome onto this podcast Paul H. Smith, who is a professional remote viewer and a teacher of remote viewing. He became a psychic spy in 1983 when he was recruited for the Army's remote viewing psychic espionage program, a program he never even knew existed up until the moment he was invited to join, even though he was like living next door to Skip Atwater. He was one of the longest-serving remote viewers in the military program. During his 7 years in that program, he studied under the legendary Hal Puthoff and Ingo Swann. He served as a first-line operational remote viewer, doing thousands of trainings and live operational RV sessions. He wrote the official manual on controlled remote viewing, and he taught CRV to new remote viewing candidates. Among his students are included the now famous remote viewers such as Lynn Buchanan, Mel Riley, and David Morehouse. I studied with David Morehouse briefly.
Okay.
Paul has briefed and demonstrated remote viewing to senators and admirals and generals and other senior military and government officials. A Desert Storm veteran, Paul retired from the Army in 1996 at the rank of Major from his final duty position, Chief of Intelligence and Security for the Military District of Washington. For 3 decades now, he has immersed himself in consciousness-based skills. He has dedicated his life to changing society's attitudes towards applied consciousness. And we're all about consciousness here. Through the powerful leverage of teaching, speaking, and writing about and organizing around remote viewing. Since 1997, he has been president and chief instructor of his own commercial full-service remote viewing training company, Remote Viewing Instructional Services Incorporated, and is a founding director of the nonprofit International Remote Viewing Association, which I, Fahrusha, belong to, and of which he is past president. He has chaired and organized 7 of IRVA's annual remote viewing conferences since the organization's founding in 1999. He has a wonderful book, Reading the Enemy's Mind, Inside Stargate, America's Psychic Espionage Program, which was published by Tor Forge in 2005 and was a Reader's Digest book bonus feature and editor's choice selection. Paul's new book, I want a copy of this book even though it's not out yet, The Essential Guide to Remote Viewing, will be released this summer. He is also co-producer of the acclaimed DVD-based Learn Dowsing training program and of the forthcoming Remote Perception Basic Operational Training course to be published July 14th, 2015. That's only a few days from now, Paul.
That's right.
Just to finish up here, he has a BA from Brigham Young University and MS from the National Intelligence University, both in Middle Eastern Studies, and a Ph.D. in philosophy from the University of Texas at Austin. So, Dr. Paul, we're going to leave it at that. We could go on forever with
very
all
impressive.
Your wonderful credentials.
I'm afraid if we did, I'd get bored pretty quickly, so I'm happy to move on.
Okay. So just to get our viewers up to speed, I had the pleasure of going down to New Orleans, Louisiana, about 10 days ago, where I attended the IRVA convention, the International Remote Viewers Association convention, and I had the pleasure of meeting you. And there were a lot of really interesting remote viewers there. But what drew me to speaking to you particularly today, other than the fact that I won your new book, which I'm thrilled about, what brought me to want to speak to you was the fact that I got your targets, the targets for the ideograms, and the target that you put up for us, that you were tasking us with there. I got hits on all of them, whereas, sometimes I'm lost in the woods. And it's my idea that when you have a good relationship to your tasker, when you have an easy time of it, that's a person you should work with.
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
So I, just before the show, Paul, Fahrusha and I were speaking, and remote viewing is really not anything I'm totally familiar with. And although a lot of our audience would have heard of it, I was surprised. I said to her, well, can you just sit there and think of something and view it? Like, for example, Lake George is a very pretty place. Could I just sit there and think about it? And she said, no, that's not remote viewing. That's sort of clairvoyance. So she made it very clear to me that it's sort of a targeted viewing, and I didn't get that before. So your purpose would be to enhance people's abilities to do that in your training and your books. Is that correct?
Yes, that's exactly right. The interesting thing is I like to think of remote viewing as the most democratic of all psychic skills.
Okay.
Because the research basically shows that everybody can do it to one degree or another. It's not, you're used to this thing where the psychics say, well, you have to have this gift before you can be psychic, right?
Right.
Well, it turns out, at least from the evidence remote viewing shows, it's not true. It turns out this is a native, normal human skill that just doesn't get exercised because nobody knows they can do it, right? So when it was developed and researched, essentially invented by Ingo Swann and then researched at Stanford Research Institute, which ultimately became SRI International, their findings were that just about everybody has the capacity. So it is a form of clairvoyance. It's actually clairvoyance wrapped up in a kind of a scientific package. You could think of it as a disciplined form of clairvoyance because there are certain protocols you follow, and then there are certain methods that can be applied. So, unlike clairvoyance, a remote viewer will start out not knowing what the target is. So, and in fact, that's actually helps the process because, when you know what the thing is you're supposed to be clairvoying, if that's a word, right?
Okay.
You're trying to be clairvoying up front, right? Then everything you already know about it and everything you can imagine or conjecture about it is going to be right there in your head. And trying to sort out what you're guessing and I hope you guys are still there.
Yes, we're listening.
Okay,
all
good.
of a sudden you did drop out. No, this is great because I you surprised me when you said that everybody has the ability, but and you can sort of bring this out in people with these instructions.
Yep. You basically, people come from all over the world to my classes. In fact, I have an Australian coming next week, so that'll be interesting. And I had a German in my last class, so so it's pretty international.
Sprechen Sie Deutsch?
Ja, doch. Können Sie Deutsch, oder?
Ja, ich auch.
Good.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Yeah. Anytime I get a chance to speak German, I like to practice. So I will try and avoid that for your audience's benefit here.
Oh, okay.
But they're coming, and I teach them, what we learned from Ingo and Hal and from the other folks, including Skip Atwater, at Fort Meade in the military program. And
so these people just sort of stumbled upon this ability because from what Fahrusha's told me, Ingo Swann was really a natural at it, and then he realized other people had the ability as well and started to bring them along.
I kind of think that the first thing that you've got to do in being clairvoyant or doing remote viewing is you've got to believe it's possible. Because I've said that before on the show, but I have to reiterate that right now.
Okay.
Well, that helps, but you know what? they were actually able to get skeptics to do it as long as they weren't too absolutely convinced against it. You just have to be willing to be open-minded. That seems to be the main ingredient here.
Oh, well, obviously I can understand why military uses would be important, but is there any, do they use it for other purposes? I mean, do you try to locate, I don't know, oil wells or lost people or something of that nature? If a plane crash goes down, I don't know.
Yeah.
I really don't know. I was just wondering what you are able to target.
Well, in the military, we actually did locate crashed planes.
Wow, really?
and missing people. We were many of our taskings were against hostages in the Middle East.
Oh, wow.
Westerners that got captured, and a few times we were successful at that. Most of the time, not. And the reason is, of course, remote viewing actually isn't. People think it's a tool for finding things, and it is a tool for finding things. It just doesn't locate them very well. So I like to tell a story back before Osama bin Laden had been found. Let's say somebody asks a remote viewer to remote view where Osama bin Laden is, and what would happen something like this. The remote viewer would say, oh yeah, there's this guy with a beard and he's in this really weird room. It's long, but it's narrow, and the walls are rocky, and there's carpet on the floor. And there's guys with guns, and if you go a long ways down, you come out into the light, and you're in a bunch of barren mountains, right? So the analyst is going to say, oh, yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Now, where is he? And the remote viewer is going to say, you idiot, I just told you where he was. He's in this long, rocky-walled room, right? So the remote viewer's found him but hasn't located him. Locational things, you can do it with remote viewing, but it basically depends on you describing a setting and someone recognizing it, right? We do dowsing. We did do dowsing as well, and that has a little bit more use in terms of finding things that are missing. What remote viewing is good for, partially it's good for predicting future events, which I'll talk about in a minute.
Really?
But mostly it's good for finding out things that exist right now or in the past that you don't have enough information about, and that's what we use it for a lot. So. So it's intriguing. People do use it practically today. They do help out police with it. We recently had a case where one of my, a former sister-in-law of mine and now still protege, Angela Thompson-Smith, provided information that was actually instrumental in solving a murder case, and the information was used in court, and the murderer was convicted. The remote viewing, the detective that was involved with the remote viewing was directly responsible for the guy being caught.
That is excellent. We did have Angela on about 2 months ago, I think, and she was a wonderful guest as well. And now I must say that part of the mystery of why there are so many Smiths at remote viewing is Nancy Smith and you and Angela Thompson-Smith, and I begin to think that everybody's name was going to be Smith.
Well, my dad used to say that everyone was named Smith till they did something wrong.
Oh.
So that makes me wonder what Fahrusha did wrong.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Well, the other question I asked Fahrusha, obviously you're seeing something, but do you ever hear anything? Is it all sight or you do?
That's where remote viewing is different than clairvoyance, and it really ought to be called remote viewing. It should have been called remote perception, which is why this DVD home training program that I collaborated on is called remote perception, because that's what it should have been called. Ingo Swann's the one that named it way back in 1971, long before, at least a year or more before the government got involved. But he relied on the visual aspect of it mostly, and so he called it remote viewing. But in fact, you get all of the five senses involved. In fact, even some of the other subliminal senses as well get involved in this process. And so you can hear, smell, taste, touch, and see things as well. Sometimes it's actually quite vivid. It's never, of course, quite the same as actually seeing it or hearing it or smelling it in person, right? But sometimes it's quite pronounced, although other times it can be very subtle. And part of the trick is to learn how to recognize the subtle input as much as the more vivid stuff.
I have a question about that. It seems that I often get songs while I'm remote viewing.
Wild thing, right?
It's completely crazy. Even when you did the talk you did about ideograms, which we don't have to get into here, as you know, because that's going into it a little probably too much in depth.
Get down into the weeds too much there. Yeah.
When it was the sailing, when it was the picture of the Great Lake or something like that that came up on the screen when it was revealed, I had been singing the song "Sailing" in my mind, sailing away. It's like a soft rock song. I don't sing, so I'm not going to regale you with the sound.
Thank you.
But okay for you, Kate. Also, when I had remote viewed an earthquake some years ago, I kept getting the Johnny Cash song, "The Ring of Fire," and it always, the songs that I get, and I'm not a musical person, the songs that I get are generally really accurate, and I wondered if anybody else had that.
Well, I can't say who all may have had that kind of experience, but it kind of makes sense in that you're not consciously paying attention at the time to the signal, right? The maybe coming in.
Right.
And so your subconscious is trying to figure out a way to convey that to you, and so it says, "I know, I'm going to have her sing Johnny Cash, and maybe she'll get the hint."
That's really interesting, because that almost it gives you how can I express this? Like two brains, your conscious driving and going to work, whatever. And then your subconscious is rolling along, trying to wake you up and saying, there's going to be an earthquake, and let's sing Ring of Fire. Maybe that'll give her an idea. Oh, that's really fascinating, Paul. So you think that the underlying consciousness really can sort of burble up to the surface a bit?
Sure. I mean, it does it all the time in just everyday life. I mean, that's half of what Freud talked about, was the fact that he called it the unconscious. I don't know that there's a distinction really between subconscious and unconscious, but he called it the unconscious actually caused us to think and do all kinds of things in our waking life that we thought we were just thinking of right then, but it actually is traceable to the unconscious and trauma in the past, all that kind of Freudian stuff. So and in fact, a lot of the psychology research with what used to be called subliminal perception is now called priming and perception without awareness, that kind of thing. All that research really does suggest that there's a lot going on at the subconscious level that we are almost blissfully unaware of in our normal waking state. So,
that's just a very interesting thought. I guess I've been aware of the concept, but I never had it put quite like that.
Well, I think we all basically do. We meet somebody and we immediately like them, or we meet somebody and we say, think I'm going to stay away from that person. And even if there's no obvious thing, like they're not carrying a dagger that's pointed at you in their hand.
Or a chainsaw.
Yeah. I like that guy Texas. With the chainsaw. Kidding. So, it is interesting. Somebody, I don't know if it was you or not, I must say my memory fails me, but was talking about it at the convention, the conference down in New Orleans, as right brain and left brain stuff.
Yeah, that's probably me, yeah. Yeah, in fact, there's some discussion that maybe the sub/unconscious is really just the right brain, because the right brain isn't verbal, particularly. The left brain is where most of our verbal mechanism is, and our discussion and our talking and all of that kind of thing. And so there's some suspicion that maybe the right brain is where the unconscious is, and all of this is going on over there, all the stuff that we're not necessarily consciously aware of, and then it gets fed over through the corpus callosum into the left brain, and then we behave according to what we need to behave as our right brain dictates. That's one possible theory about it. So
now, if they get if someone in the audience is interested in mastering this, then they can get your DVD. That would help them.
Once it comes out,
or start them down the road, I should say.
It'll on the 14th of July is when we're going to go live with it.
Best deal.
Including the website and everything else. So if people are interested, they could go to the website freedowsingdvd.com.
Great.
That's a portal to the dowsing training set I have, and they can go there. And actually, you can get a free dowsing DVD. It's an introduction to my training program, and they can go there and get that. They can order that, and then they'll get on the mailing list. And as soon as the remote perception course comes out, then they'll be notified about it. So
why don't you repeat that address, that web address?
It is the 3 W's, of course, www. And then it is literally the words strung together, freedowsingdvd.com. So the word free, F-R-E-E, dowsing, D-O-W-S-I-N-G, DVD.com.
Now, I always thought dowsing was just with water and a stick. Am I wrong? I guess obviously I am wrong.
We searched for missing. We searched for missing H bombs. We searched for downed aircraft. We searched for hostages. We searched for contraband narcotics on container ships. We searched for all kinds of things. Anything that we didn't know where it was, but knew what it was. Mm-hmm. And that's a requirement in dowsing. You have to know what it is you're looking for, right? Anything we knew what it was, but didn't know where it was, we at one time or another were probably asked to remote view and then dowse for it, using the dowsing as an adjunct to remote viewing.
And you use maps to do this? You use map dowsing? Okay.
Maps, diagrams, globes. Whatever it took.
So the original water dowsers were probably just using the stick as a means to make them believe that they could do that. Just like an external talisman or whatever. Say, yeah, I can find water, but that's where the dowsing. So you find things with this.
Yes,
that is just. I really am very new to this, so it's to me it's quite amazing.
Yeah, it works. I mean, in fact, it dawns on me we could probably do a whole other show on dowsing. I have a lot to say about that, and I don't want to have that take over the conversation. But
tell us a little bit about your new book.
Well, I noticed in surveying the literature in the remote viewing field that there was a big gap that was missing. And that gap was a basic beginner's book that introduces people to the entire topic of remote viewing, a kind of survey of the field. And I kind of owe it to my dad, because he said, well, you should write a pamphlet, just kind of an introductory thing, and publish it. And he gave me that idea probably 15 years ago, And I said, oh, yeah, well, that's a good idea. I'll get around to it someday. And I realized there was that huge gap. It's still there. People write their memoirs. People write technical books on the technical aspects of dowsing, but nobody's ever written a really good introductory book. And so the Essential Guide to Remote Viewing, that's the whole point of the book, is to introduce people to dowsing. It actually has 3 purposes. One is if you just heard about remote viewing, you don't really know what it is, you don't want to spend a lot of time and money, you can get this book, and it will give you a very thorough introduction to it, all the different aspects of it, and even teach you a little bit how to do it. And it gives you a starting point. The other set of people who it's important for, it would be, let's say you are into remote viewing and you have a bunch of family and friends who think you're crazy.
Did I hear my name? Did I hear my name?
And you want something to introduce them to it that isn't going to get into all the UFOs and Bigfoot and all that stuff that a lot of people want to like to connect remote viewing to. Just give them a very sensible approach, and then they can connect it to whatever they want afterwards, right? It tries to desensationalize it while at the same time giving you responsible information. And then there's one further demographic it may appeal to, and those are folks who've been in remote viewing a long time, and just don't know. Maybe they know a lot about some parts of it, and other parts of it they don't really know about. And so that pretty much covers, I think, the entire field of reasons why people might want to have a beginning kind of introductory book on remote viewing.
Yeah, I think it's important because, when people mention remote viewing to me, I think of, the infamous men stare at goats, and that's it. I think that's great that you wrote something like that. I think you're quite right. It is important for someone like myself. What?
I lost you there for a second.
You did?
Yeah.
Hi.
Are you there? Yes, good.
Yeah. You must have been on delay and started to say something bad.
No, we don't have a delay
We
button.
don't have a delay. We could say just about anything, but don't.
Well, I'll be careful then.
In any case, so I'm going when I receive the copy that I won in the raffle, which I'm really looking for. When is that coming out? When am I going to get my copy? What's up with it?
Well,
14th,
hopefully August. It's in the process of being typeset right now. It's almost done. Went through a final proof of it, and I should hopefully by the end of the week we'll have a final typeset version, which then we will send off to a proofreader. And once the proofreader's found all the things I missed, right, then it will just be a matter of having it printed and shipped. So.
Well, great. I'm looking forward to it, and I'm going to lend it to Miss Kate Valentine, so she will understand what I'm talking about when I talk about remote viewing. And I think she really has the gist of it at this juncture. So now I think one thing that people who are in our listening audience also don't understand is the different types of remote viewing. And I've studied several different types, and as I said to you before, I really find that my success depends on my rapport with the tasker, and not whether it's ARV or CRV. But maybe you would like to explain some of the different types of remote viewing that are out there, and the reason for all of them, including I've mentioned sometimes on the air about how the Hawaii remote viewers do it, which is really very painstakingly protocoled.
Yeah. So, and that's actually one of the virtues of the book we were just talking about. Is I have a whole chapter on methods. I explain the different ways of doing things. But just for now, since the book isn't available yet, so CRV, that stands for Controlled Remote Viewing, and it was a more disciplined approach to it that Ingo Swann and Hal Puthoff developed to help people. Well, it is actually developed so that they would have a vehicle to transmit remote viewing capability to military personnel who might not have thought they had a psychic bone in their bodies, right? And so that's why I learned it. Is they brought me in. I had never had any kind of psychic experience whatsoever, and they said, "Well, we have this contract with SRI, and they're going to teach you how to be a psychic." I said, okay, that sounds good, and that's the point of CRV. It's quite structured, and it's probably the grandfather of almost, I would say probably 90% of the people doing remote viewing out there. Their methodology is either CRV or some descendant of CRV. ARV, actually, interestingly enough, that stands for Associative Remote Viewing. That doesn't actually involve a method of remote viewing itself. What it has to do with is a way of applying remote viewing, and it's designed to help the remote viewer and people working with him or her to be able to predict future events, so you can take advantage of that advanced information. It's a kind of precognitive remote viewing, if you will. And it's used to predict the outcome of sporting events or stock prices, where they're going to close up or down, or that kind of thing. And in fact, it's one of the more popular forms right now, and one of the more popular applications, because people are making money at it. You know that old saying, well, if you're psychic, why aren't you rich? Well, there are people who are actually making quite a bit of money with remote viewing using this ARV, Associative Remote Viewing process. In fact, my son in college at the University of Colorado, the class he was in, they decided as a class project they were going to run an ARV project, and the stock market was going to be their target. And they had one of the course auditors kicked in. He was a .com millionaire, so he thought he'd play along, and he kicked in $10,000 of seed money. And by the time they were done, in 2 weeks, 7 correct trades, no misses, they had turned that $10,000 into $26,500.
Nice, very nice, tidy.
Okay, I'll take that course.
Yes. She's going to sign up.
Sign me up.
Okay.
But there is, according to Russell Targ, at any rate, there is fatigue that sets in after a point. Is there not?
Yes, and I presume you're talking about it. Are you talking about associative remote viewing here, or just remote viewing in general?
I'm talking about associative remote viewing for a stock market where you,
Yes.
or like with Russell, it was the silver futures or something of that nature.
Yeah, I've done a lot of ARV in my past, and I found that I went up and down in terms of success, partly based on I was getting bored, right? So you do have to kind of pace yourself, and if you find yourself just kind of getting bored and just tossing off a session or two, you might want to stop and take a break at that point. In this case, we're not talking remote viewing, we're talking psychology. Human psychology is such that anything it does over time repetitively becomes tedious.
Right.
And you start taking shortcuts, you start getting lazy. So, yeah, that does indeed happen. So.
One other thing, extended remote viewing. Would you like to define that for our listening audience?
Sure. That was a kind of a proto remote viewing approach that Skip Atwater developed for me. Now, I don't know how much your audience knows about Skip Atwater. Have you mentioned him before?
I've mentioned him before, and he, in fact, was one of my remote viewing instructors, and an excellent one he was, and a wonderful gentleman as well. So, I've mentioned him a lot, but I have not delved into, his entire history. Perhaps he will come on one day and regale us with some
Okay,
tales.
well, let me give a 2-cent soundbite on him. We knew him as Fred because his official name is Fred Holmes Atwater, but he preferred the nickname Skip after he retired from the Army. But he was the officer that actually was tasked to create the Army remote viewing program. And he started it in 1977 and working with other officers as well, and retired finally in 1987. But he created the Army program, and he was kind of its guiding light for those 10 years. And in the course of that, he developed this extended remote viewing approach, which takes advantage of a hypnagogic state, that is, mind awake, body asleep. And in extended remote viewing, or as we called it, ERV, you weren't sitting at a table fairly alert like you are in CRV. In this one, you'd be laying on a bed or a couch or something, and you try and establish that mental state that's just between awake and asleep. The idea being that your subconscious can communicate with you better when you're in that state or condition.
Mm-hmm.
And then a monitor would come in and start asking you questions about a particular target. They'd give you the coordinates and say, okay, at this specific latitude and longitude, there is something we want you to describe. And the viewer, not knowing what that is, goes out and the subconscious directs the viewer to go to the right spot and then starts describing what's there. And so that's what we call ERV, is essentially this mind awake, body asleep, laying on a bed, being interviewed by the monitors that's with you.
Wow. Okay.
Well, the other thing on that ARV, that if you can predict things like stock market or sporting events, whatever, that almost indicates that the future is sort of fixed in a way.
It almost seems that way, but actually not. At least the way I look at ARV, and I've used it a lot and trained a lot of people how to do it. So my view of the future, and I think it's supported by a lot of the evidence, is the future hasn't happened yet, right? There are a lot of people who that seems like, well, it's obvious, duh, the future hasn't happened yet. But there are a lot of philosophies in which the future already exists. And if you could predict the future with high degree of accuracy no matter what, then that would probably be an indication it did. But in fact, when we try to remote view events in what I call the open future, like when will the next terrorist attack be, or where will the next terrorist attack be, or what will the just the question itself, will so and so win the World Series, in 3 months or whatever, that doesn't turn out to be very accurate. Occasionally you get an actual hit, but most of the time you're wrong. And in fact, of course, everybody associates foretelling the future with remote viewing, with being psychic in general. But in fact, it's one of the things that being psychic is it does the poorest at. We just happen to remember those things that are hits, right? And so,
right.
So we think that. But associative remote viewing actually is roughly the same accuracy level as if you were kind of trying to remote view the present or the past. And so the question is, well, if remote viewing an open future event doesn't work very well, why does this work so well? And I think the answer is, if you're remote viewing an event that is deterministic, that is destined to happen by the facts, the physical facts at the moment and as they continue out, you can do that pretty accurately. What happens with associative remote viewing is you essentially collapse the future time stream in that narrow corner of the future into an almost deterministic event, which allows you to actually be accurate about it. So let me explain real quickly how this works.
Okay.
So let's say you want to know if the Longhorns or Texas A&M are going to win the football game, right?
Okay.
Well, if you ask a remote viewer who's going to win, Longhorns or A&M, the remote viewer just consciously coming up with an answer is never going to do any better than chance in that environment, because they're aware and alert, and they're essentially guessing even though they're trying to remote view. But what you do is you essentially use it's kind of like a semaphore flag. One flag means A&M's going to win. The other flag means that Texas is going to win, right? So you pick a target, let's say a pencil, to mean that A&M is going to win, and you pick another target, a hamburger, that stands for the Longhorns winning. Well, the viewer doesn't know anything about what target you picked, but you know that if A&M is going to win, you're going to show the viewer a pencil after the game, and you know that if the Longhorns win, you're going to show the viewer a hamburger after the game, right? Okay. And so you ask the viewer, I want you to describe the object I'm going to hand you once this game is over. And if the remote viewer says, well, it's big and round and brown and soft and squishy and smells like food, well, that means you're going to hand the viewer a hamburger. In theory, it means you're going to hand the hamburger to the viewer afterwards. You know that, the viewer doesn't. And so you wait. And assuming the Longhorns win, then that tells you, oh, okay, the Longhorns won. I've got to give the viewer a hamburger now that the game is over, so that they're essentially sending themselves information back into the past.
Ah.
So it's also really important to follow through, isn't it, Paul?
Yes, absolutely. Well, it's interesting. What I would like to see is somebody do a research project where they have a control group where they're giving them feedback. In other words, they do give them the hamburger in the future, right? And then another control group where they don't. And just see what happens, to see if the ones that get the feedback are more accurate than the ones who don't. Because there's one other possibility that the subconscious knows what's going to be handed and just tells them even if they don't ever get the feedback. I think that is not going to work very well, but it would be interesting to test that condition and see what happens.
Yeah, it certainly would, for sure.
Wow, it's sort of an interesting way to view things.
There were some.
No pun intended. Right?
Yeah, I was going to just say it, not even remotely.
There were,
There you go.
There were some people who were viewing for hedge funds by being sent two photos, like one picture of a lemon and another picture of a baby crying. So you wouldn't have any confusion between those, and they would just pick one picture or another, and then the hedge fund would go with what that picture was associated with.
Well, remember what it's actually the way around. The picture goes with whatever the hedge fund does.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and that's actually what is used mostly these days is photos, because it's really hard, particularly in a long distance, to send a hamburger through the mail, for example, to give the viewer feedback long distance. So usually we use photos these days, but obviously, as you've just described, you have to make sure the photos are so much different than each other that it's obvious which one the viewer has described, because it can be very vague sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know time is getting late for you, but I wanted to ask you the final, the second to final question, which is, Kate and I are both experiencers, and we're very interested in the subject of UFOs. And I have read accounts by Ingo Swann and by Joe McMoneagle of Ingo's viewing the moon and Joe's viewing Mars. And while those accounts are extraordinarily interesting to me.
So let me before you continue. By the way, I remote viewed the moon for Ingo.
Did you?
So sometime we could talk about that maybe.
Well, I would love to talk about that because I also viewed the moon sort of accidentally, but the remote viewing adventure that I found to be the most compelling in the reading of it was written down on a blog that Skip Atwater once had. I don't know if it's even up any longer. And it had to do, I believe he was the tasker and tasked a number of viewers on a derelict Argentinian, I'm guessing, boat, a military boat in the Argentinian waters. And what do you know? When I spoke to you about it, you were one of the viewers.
Yep.
And so, can you talk about that? Can you talk to that?
Yes. So how this happened is that Hal Putoff had some. There were some UFO events that he was curious about, and he had some coordinates and such, and some dates and all that, and he passed a bunch of these on to Skip. Now, this particular incident actually came from UFO researcher Jim McCampbell. I talked to Hal about this because I was curious to know what instigated this whole thing, and he said that he had gotten some information from McCampbell about this, and so he passed on the targeting information to Skip Atwater, and then over the course of a couple of years. In 1983, Skip ran 2 viewers on it, and in 1985 ran 2 more viewers on it. The first in 1983 was Joe McMoneagle and also Tom McNair, who were both viewers at the time in the program. And both of them reported essentially that they had a perception of a ship and a cloud over the ship and the UFO doing something really bizarre and the crew panicking and essentially disappearing. I think Joe had them jumping off the back of the ship or jumping off the ship or something in terror. And Tom, let's see, actually I have some of my notes here, so let's see what Tom said. I'll tell you real quick. Whoops, where's my cursor? Here we go. And Tom talked about a strange billowy energy cloud that caused fear, and he felt should be avoided. So then 2 years later, Skip works Bill Ray on it, who was one of my proteges and companions or colleagues there. Bill described the UFO as spreading a mist of vapor and a steam around a naval vessel and attacking it with energy that made the crew insane with fear and which left the ship empty of human life. Okay? And he described the UFO's occupants as cold and unpleasant.
Oh.
And he noted that,
wow.
Yeah, so that was interesting. I did it. He tasked me, and unfortunately mine didn't turn out very well because what I said was, it was short, wasn't very informative. I said that I thought, what I thought was mental noise. We call it analytical overlay of a UFO incident involving a ship and a cloud. And I said, I can't get this out of my head, and so I ended my session.
Oh my goodness. Well, one thing that I think we've got to point out for our listeners, and I'm sorry to interrupt you here, but we have to point out to our listeners, here are 4 gentlemen. I assume, if the protocol was followed, that none of you knew that you were supposed to be viewing a UFO or a ship.
Nope, we did not know. We got coordinates and a date.
Wow.
Just a number and a date.
Yeah.
And you had no idea in time or space where this thing was, and all 4 of you came up with something that was remarkable.
Yep, that's right. And the interesting thing is the ship was what instigated the whole thing. Was that this ship? It was an Argentinian minesweeper, an old World War II minesweeper, as I understand it, and it was found drifting in the Gulf.
Oh wow!
With nobody on board. I mean,
oh wow!
Yeah, I want to say the crew roughly numbers on a minesweeper roughly around 70, maybe something like that.
That's a lot of people.
There was nobody on board, and there was no clue, as I remember, what had happened to them. And so, to have the viewers come up with these kind of results independently, all blind to the target, years apart, that's pretty affirmative kind of stuff. And it wasn't
Yeah.
like Skip had some idea in his head about what he'd find out or that Hal did. They really didn't know. They had no preconceived notions about it. And so when they tasked us on it, it wasn't like we picked it up from their minds, telepathic overlay, which sometimes happens. It's like this stuff is kind of came right out of the ether. And so that suggests something very provocative about it.
Indeed.
That might, in fact, be true, so.
What year was that? Oh, do you remember?
What year did the ship go derelict?
Yeah. Just
1981.
Oh, very recently.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, maybe not for some of your listeners, but for us, it's very recent.
The ones that haven't been born yet.
I was thinking along the lines of Bermuda Triangle, and then it's 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, and who knows. But 81, wow. And was that wasn't like during the time of the Falkland Islands, was it? I don't know.
Yeah, let me think. Falklands, I was actually on a military exercise in England when the Falklands thing happened. I think the Falklands were in 82, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, so it could have been associated with that as well, possibly.
Possibly, yeah.
Huh.
But this was in the Gulf.
Oh, it wasn't. Oh, it wasn't off Argentina.
Wasn't in.
Yeah, it was. It was east of Argentina, on the eastern side of Argentina, in the Gulf of San Matias, and so we're talking quite a ways away from the Falklands. But the Falklands War took place, I'll tell you right now, in the spring and summer of 1982.
Wow.
So this was a while after this event. This event was. Let me see if I can find out what the actual date was. I know where I can find out. Hang on a second. The tasking was. Nope, that's not going to tell me. It just says 1981. I'm not sure when in 1981.
That's fine.
Yeah. But it just said sometimes there's in the UFO field. Sometimes they say that they come down and they interfere with human governments and war and so on. And maybe they sunk the wrong vessel but I find that very interesting
all
that
those
you saw.
fellows.
70 people. You all remote viewed this, and something must have happened. And then you found the derelict ship. I find that fascinating. That to me is amazing.
It's to me that is a very strong proof of UFO being real. Being real and interfering with human beings. We all know about the Brazilian situation where the people all irradiated on the island of Colares in the Amazon, the mouth of the Amazon, and how they came. But that is a word of mouth kind of thing. It wasn't remote viewed. So that'd be an interesting target to remote view the Colares incident.
Yeah.
Well. Anyway, I just want to thank you for being a wonderful, wonderful guest with us. We have one final question, which I would ask, because some remote viewers are constantly seeing the end of the world in various ways. How do you come down on that?
Well, for one thing, the world is going to end.
Eventually.
A lot of what you hear allegedly done by remote viewing about the apocalypse coming is usually these folks are working front loaded, which means all of their preconceptions are right there, and they haven't, they oftentimes endorse their favorite theory rather than actually reporting remote viewing data.
Right.
So I find all of that stuff not particularly trustworthy. There's one of my former colleagues who's famous for predicting the end of the world, and he's been doing it actually since the 70s. My first encounter with a gentleman who is an interesting guy, there's no question, but was in 1983 and 1984, and he was telling us all that the world is going to come to an end. We're going to have this massive apocalypse thing in 1984-85. Well, it didn't happen, and ever since then, it's been like that. It involves of course, the popular thing is kill shot. He talks about kill shot.
Yes.
He's been talking about and predicting that annually since 1997. So it's almost 20 years, and it still hasn't happened. So
he who shall not be mentioned.
But what is kill shot?
Kill shot.
Yeah, A giant solar flare that allegedly will wipe out most of the life on Earth.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then there was one, wasn't there one with a big meteor, too, that was coming?
Yeah, it was a comet. Yeah,
a comet.
A comet.
Okay. Well, I just had to ask you your opinion on that because he does a lot of publicity, and probably some of our viewers have heard about some of that publicity. So let's not give him any more publicity. And I thank you so much for being on. It's really kind of you. And
we need to get the website.
Yes, we want the books, the website, and the courses. Lay them out for our...
So the only 2 websites right now, because the others aren't live yet, right? The one is, and I mentioned it, the freedowsingdvd.com. And if anyone's interested in dowsing, they can get that introductory DVD, and they'll get on the mailing list for when the remote perception course comes out. The other one, which is actually, I'll announce all this stuff on this one as well, is my main website for my training, and that's rviewer.com. So the letter R, the word viewer.com. And, I post my schedule for my courses and various information and things on there. There's quite a bit of information on it. So.
Okay, and the names of the books, Paul, don't be shy.
Okay, well, there's Reading the Enemy's Mind, which you can still get used. It's out of print except on Kindle. You can get it on Kindle. You can get it used, and I highly recommend it. I'm not making any more money off of it, but that's okay because I think the book is still worth reading. The book I will be bringing out is called The Essential Guide to Remote Viewing.
And that's a basic guide for people who are just getting started or think they may want to get started.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay, well, thank you so much, and have a wonderful afternoon out in sunny Utah.
You bet. I'm going to enjoy it. Thank you.
Okay. Really, thank you so much, Paul. Very interesting.
You bet.
Really, I had no idea there was that much involved with it. Thank you.
Now we have our little news report. We have a news report. And the news report is about alien life on the comet that the Philae lander from the Rosetta Rosetta mission. It's all about that comet, which has a long Russian name, which I'm probably going to murder. But here's the news report, and I am getting this from Sky News, okay? Evidence of alien life is unequivocal on the comet carrying the Philae probe through space, 2 leading astronomers have said. The experts say the most likely explanation for certain features of the 67P Chernyunov-Gerasimenko comet, such as its organic-rich black crust, is the presence of living organisms beneath an icy surface. Rosetta, the European spacecraft orbiting the comet, is also said to have picked up strange clusters of organic material that resemble viral particles. But neither Rosetta nor its lander probe are equipped to search for direct evidence of life after a proposal to include this in the mission was allegedly dismissed. Dum, dum, dum,
Bummer.
Dum. Astronomer and astrobiologist Professor Chandra Wickramasinghe, who was involved in planning for the mission 15 years ago, said, "I wanted to include at a very inexpensive life detection experiment. At the time, it was thought that this was a bizarre proposition. He and colleague Dr. Max Wallace from the University of Cardiff believe 67P and other comets like it could provide homes for living molecules similar to the extremophiles that inhabit the most inhospitable regions of the Earth. They say comets may have helped to sow the seeds of life on Earth and possibly other planets, such as Mars, early in the solar system's existence." So, I'm not going to read this entire thing, but you get the gist of it. And Kate, was so wonderful as to have Dr. Chandra Wickramasinghe on her previous
just like
program.
saying that name.
On her previous program, and I had the privilege of asking that gentleman a question and call him. And I wouldn't you like to have him back on?
Yeah, fabulous guest.
Talk about panspermia and all that. I'm a big fan of his.
You know what bothers me about him is he's obviously a brilliant man. He's a good scientist. He does good research. And because he verges to some very slight extent into what used to be considered paranormal fields like exobiology, which NASA has now christened as astrobiology, therefore making it acceptable, he was really discounted by other scientists, very unfairly, I feel. And this sort of, it's a warning to all young people that are just starting into research. They look at this fellow and they go, oh, he's Nobel Prize material, and he just got scouted off to the side because he got interested in something that was unacceptable, so they stay away from it. And it's those frontier knowledge that brings back the most interesting results. So it's a shame that it really gets discounted, like the guys with cold fusion. I mean, they murdered them. Their careers are totally destroyed.
That is correct.
And now they're starting to say, oh, yeah, there is such a thing as cold fusion, you know. But anyway, but yes, Chandra was fabulous. He's a true gentleman as well as an excellent scientist.
And he was the associate of
Fred Hoyle.
Sir Fred Hoyle, the royal astronomer of
another guy that, but he had to do with comets, and comets bring water and life.
Panspermia, yes.
Yeah. Well, you know, really, whether once you get DNA, once that molecule is made, it'll find a home anywhere, and it will evolve into any life form that fits that environment.
Right.
But you do somewhere along the line, and the gazillion galaxies are out there, all it had to do was one time create that molecule, and boom, the rest will be written history, because it'll spread. It'll absolutely spread.
And all the billions of planets out there. And now some of our probes that are up in space, such as the space station, are said to have different organic material on them that could not have gotten there by bouncing off the Earth.
No,
so it came from space.
Listen,
sounds like a horror movie, right?
No.
It came from space.
Well, it does. And you know, like when I was in grade school, I was taught there are no planets outside of this solar system. There are no other solar systems. Well, that was malarkey, and we all knew it.
We knew it. We knew it at the time. And I didn't believe a word of it.
Yeah. So finally they found Pegasus, what was it, 251 or whatever. That man they did not destroy. He had concrete evidence that they could not dispute. It was sort of like Galileo when he looked through the telescope and said Jupiter has 4 moons. And the Inquisition said, no, it doesn't. And he said, yes, it does. And he go, no, it doesn't. He go, well, look through the telescope. There's 4 moons. No, there aren't. Yes, there are.
Who do you believe, me or your
lying eyes? I mean, you know, it's that same nonsense. And yeah, Chandra is an outstanding. And I'm sorry, I way off the topic here.
No, that's great. So we're just having this conversation, and please like us.
Yeah.
On all the places we are. Yeah. Facebook.
We need
iTunes.
Likes. We need likes.
Facebook, iTunes, and both of our websites, both. ShatteredRealityPodcast.com and ShatteredRealityPodcast.wordpress.com, which is the mirror site.
I'm getting a remote view of people liking us.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, let's do a...
Well, that's called remote influencing, and one of these guys that we get on, I don't know which one. We could have brought it up with Mr. Smith. He was certainly very affable and friendly person, but I've often thought about the art of remote influencing rather than remote viewing and the possibilities therein. So I am remote influencing you now. Okay. All right. So you want to wrap it up? Go ahead, Kate.
I'll be fine. Thank you so much for listening. It's always been our pleasure. I hope you've learned something from it. I certainly did, and we'll see you next time.
You got it. Bye for now.